You've seen this before. A scandal rising like smoke, twisting through the city streets. But this one was different. The rules had changed. Outside, the wind carried voices across the skyline. Someone shouted. A door clicked shut. The lights flickered. It was quiet, almost ordinary. And yet, beneath the ordinary, a storm was forming. One wrong step, one careless word, one hidden truth could unravel everything. And somewhere, in a room behind locked doors, the ledger opened. Pages turned. Names glowed under the lamplight. Connections that no one had seen before now screamed for attention. And the man in the penthouse, the one Americans had long admired, feared, or envied, realized the threads were tightening around him. By sunrise, the celebration had soured. And no one could explain why. But the real story hadn't even started. He grew up where highways met the river, a place of neon signs and rusted chain-link fences. A diner on the corner served coffee that burned, but people kept coming back. And he was there too, as a boy, small hands wrapped around a chipped mug, staring out at the cars speeding past. You felt this before. The longing for a life you couldn't name. The quiet fear that everyone else understood a world you were only visiting. He had scars that no one talked about. A childhood accident left a subtle limp in his step. He hid it behind polished shoes and confident posture. But he felt it every morning, a reminder of fragility beneath the bravado. Late nights, he watched city lights dance across apartment walls. He imagined power differently than everyone else. Not as a crown, but as a game, the kind you could never let others see you playing. And yet, in private, he dreamed of something bigger. A legacy that would outlast the skyscrapers and the cameras. The contradictions were always there. Charisma and paranoia, generosity and ruthlessness. He laughed loudly in boardrooms and diners. But sometimes, in the quiet of a hotel room, he whispered questions no one could answer. He just didn't know what was coming, a friend said years later. And that was the truth. Even when surrounded by gold and accolades, he was blind to the currents under the surface. At 15, he discovered the ledger. A notebook, scribbled in ink and chaos, containing names, addresses, hints of things adults would never admit. It fascinated him. It terrified him. And it called to something deep inside, a hunger for understanding, or maybe control. He carried that notebook everywhere. Through high school cafeterias, across factory floors during summer jobs, past highways lit with headlights cutting through fog. It became a talisman, a symbol of knowledge he didn't yet fully comprehend. You know this feeling, you think. The urge to see behind the curtain. The craving to touch the edges of forbidden things, just to know. By the time he reached adulthood, the world had already started shaping him. Every handshake, every photograph, every whispered rumor became a brick in a structure he was building. A structure that could collapse in an instant, if one detail shifted. And yet, beneath the ambition, beneath the public persona, he remained human. Vulnerable. Fearful of losing the only thing he truly wanted, the illusion of control. But something in him was shifting. And he just didn't know what was coming. Across the city, the morning fog lifted. In diners, on highways, in empty apartments. People went about their routines, oblivious to the storm approaching. And in the penthouse, he stared out at the skyline again. Remembering the boy who clutched the chipped mug. The ledger, long forgotten in a safe, hummed quietly with secrets. Connections waiting to be made. Stories waiting to break. And a game that had only just begun. You've seen this before. The rise of someone who could charm, who could terrify, who could bend the rules. But what they didn't see, what he couldn't yet see, was how fast the world around him could turn. Because the ledger wasn't just a book. It was a map. A map of power. A map of danger. And for the first time, he realized. The threads of his own story were about to tangle with something far larger than himself. At first, the reports looked normal. A routine investigation. A few whispers. A few names. Nothing anyone outside the circle needed to notice. But a single detail fractured everything. A date scribbled in the margin of the ledger. A location repeated across different entries. A voice on a recording that didn't match the face on the screen. He noticed it first. The man who had built a life of control, who prided himself on reading people before they even spoke, felt a ripple of uncertainty, small, almost imperceptible. But it was enough. "You've asked this question too," the city seemed to whisper. "Why now? Why here?" By sunrise, the city was already trembling. Streetlights flickered against the gray morning haze. No one knew why the sirens screamed, why the reporters ran. A man in a tailored suit stood on the balcony of a penthouse. The skyline stretched beneath him, a cold, glittering grid. And yet, he looked smaller than the moment demanded. Inside, a single phone vibrated. A message blinked on the screen: "It's happening again." No one else knew. Not yet. The party had ended hours ago. But traces lingered: spilled champagne, broken glass, half-whispered threats. Security cameras captured everything, yet something was missing. Something they were all avoiding. The crowd had dispersed, leaving empty chairs, discarded favors, laughter that felt hollow now. By the pool, a single shadow stretched across the tiles. It moved too deliberately, too purposefully. You knew this feeling. Something unseen was watching. Across town, the news cycle started spinning. Voices echoed in apartment hallways and diners and gas stations. Reports were vague, fractured, contradictory. At first glance, it seemed normal. But a detail, a single, overlooked detail, fractured everything. A name whispered in private rooms. A ledger that shouldn't exist. And in the penthouse, the man's hand trembled as he placed a call. "Do you understand what this means?" There was no answer. The cameras didn't capture the phone call. They didn't catch the fear in his eyes. They didn't notice the subtle way the gold cufflink reflected the first light. But the real story hadn't even started. In boardrooms, people smiled politely, nodded, made agreements. Outside, reporters scrolled their feeds, piecing together fragments of something they couldn't name. Screens lit up. Voices sharpened. No one agreed on what was real anymore. And then, a rule shifted. A law he thought he understood bent unexpectedly. An ally hesitated when loyalty mattered most. A security camera, the one he believed was his fail-safe, went dark. At first, he denied it. He chalked it up to coincidence. Chance. A simple mistake. But denial only lasted so long. Because the ledger began to move in unexpected ways. Names reappeared in new contexts. Connections became contradictions. And moral pressure, once abstract, now pressed in on him like a steel vice. There was one detail everyone missed. A party invitation that didn't exist in the official record. A voice heard in passing, noting someone shouldn't be there. A photograph, cropped poorly, leaving shadows that weren't shadows at all. By nightfall, the first cracks appeared publicly. Tweets and feeds and breaking alerts collided. Opinions clashed, rumors ignited, alliances wavered. "You know this feeling," the man whispered to himself in the penthouse mirror. "It's when the world you built starts slipping. When the rules you thought were iron suddenly feel like sand." He tried to regain control. A press statement drafted. A denial sent. A smile rehearsed for cameras. But expectation, the invisible force that governed perception, had already shifted. At the party's remnants, the whispers grew louder. The staff who had once been shadows now spoke, cautiously, revealing fragments no one was meant to hear. And the ledger. It wasn't waiting anymore. It was active. You've seen this before, someone might say. The rise, the stumble, the public unraveling. But this time, it wasn't just reputation at stake. The very structure of power around him quivered. And then, nothing made sense. A timeline contradicted itself. A trusted confidant became an unknown variable. A single journalist's investigation threatened to expose patterns he hadn't even recognized. The real danger wasn't change. It was who controlled the definition of normal. And somewhere, behind locked doors, the ledger pulsed like a heartbeat. Each page turned, each entry revealed, another test. And the man realized, for the first time in decades, he wasn't in control anymore. Because control, as he'd learned in lonely boardrooms and empty hotel corridors, is an illusion. And illusions, once shattered, can cut deeper than any truth. By midnight, the city slept, unaware. But inside penthouses, offices, and diner booths, the first tremors of the storm had begun. And the man, the architect of his own empire, understood. He had just entered a game without rules. And he didn't know who would define the next move. The ledger wasn't just a book. It was a map. A network of connections that spanned decades, cities, and facades. And no one outside a handful of rooms had ever seen it, until now. What they called freedom, was quiet dependency. What they called control, was curated chaos. In a dimly lit archive, records stacked to the ceiling, a single researcher traced names across pages. Patterns emerged, repeated meetings, odd coincidences, whispers documented in handwriting so meticulous it almost seemed surgical. And here's the part almost no one saw. The threads weren't random. They were engineered. The man in the penthouse had spent years thinking he controlled the narrative. But the ledger revealed the opposite. Every move, every handshake, every smiling photograph was already accounted for in an invisible system. He was a piece on a board he hadn't even realized existed. You felt this before. The moment you realize your choices weren't as free as you imagined. The dizzying awareness that the rules weren't written by you. It wasn't just power he'd misjudged. It was the architecture of influence, the quiet forces steering decisions, shaping reputations, dictating alliances. And at the center of it, the ledger. A mirror reflecting not just the city, but every moral compromise, every secret kept, every loyalty bought or broken. The paradox was almost cruel. He had risen believing he was the puppeteer. Yet every tug on a string, every calculated risk, had already been anticipated, catalogued, and countered. A whisper of a truth slipped through the cracks. You've built your empire. But it's not yours. The emotional shock hit like a hammer. For the first time, he felt vulnerability, pure, unfiltered, unavoidable. The kind of fear that no briefings, no cameras, no smiling aides could mask. It gnawed at him. The ledger didn't just expose others. It exposed him. Patterns revealed themselves in public records, in private memos, in photographs long discarded. The very society he had mastered now revealed its inner logic. Chaos masquerading as order. Compliance masquerading as choice. Power masquerading as freedom. And yet, through the fear, through the growing sense of futility, there was clarity. The system wasn't omnipotent. It was human. Flawed. Fragile. And that fragility, invisible to almost everyone, was now the only way forward. At night, screens glowed across apartments, offices, diners. People began to notice anomalies, a meeting that never happened, a guest that didn't exist, a message that vanished before it was read. The ledger was active. It was pulling threads that no one could ignore. The man knew it now. He couldn't silence the system. He couldn't control the ledger. He couldn't even predict it. And yet, the revelation carried a bitter opportunity. Because within the system's logic, one could still navigate. One could still leverage, manipulate, adapt. But the rules were changing faster than he could. And each choice carried consequences that were no longer theoretical. They were immediate. They were public. "You've seen this before," the voice of memory said. A rise, a fall, a hidden truth finally breaking into the open. But this time, it wasn't just a scandal. It was a system exposing itself. And the man at the center realizing he had been, unknowingly, a part of it all along. And as the city slept beneath neon and fog, the ledger pulsed quietly. Pages turned themselves. Names aligned, connections lit up like constellations. And the man, finally seeing the map in its entirety, understood. The real story wasn't about power. It was about knowledge. And knowledge had a life of its own. Screens lit up. Notifications pinged. Voices sharpened. No one agreed on what was real anymore. The man in the penthouse paced. Every step echoed against marble floors. The ledger lay open on the table, pages fluttering as if stirred by an invisible hand. Each name, each note, each connection, a spark threatening to ignite chaos. You felt this before. The world tipping just out of reach of comprehension. The kind of panic that arrives slowly, then suddenly, in waves. He could silence a voice. He could bury a truth. But he could not stop a mind that finally learned to question. Outside, the city roared. Taxi horns, murmurs, emergency sirens, distant laughter. The storm wasn't just inside the penthouse. It was everywhere. A society breathing uncertainty, caught between whispers and headlines. He tried to reach allies. Phone calls unanswered. Emails ignored. Even those sworn to loyalty faltered under the weight of what they didn't understand. And the ledger, it demanded movement. It wasn't static. It pushed, pulled, revealed, concealed. A game he hadn't agreed to, yet was forced to play. Every attempt to control the narrative backfired. Every carefully planned message fractured into misinterpretation. Every public smile became a weapon for someone else's agenda. You know this feeling, he thought. The pressure of being watched. The terror of realizing your life isn't your own. The storm reached the rooftops. Drones hovered, lights flickered, and somewhere, cameras captured fleeting glimpses of truth. But only glimpses. And glimpses are dangerous. Because they make the mind chase patterns that may not exist. Inside, he faced himself. Reflected in mirrors, in polished glass, in the eyes of aides too loyal to speak freely. Who was he, if power was no longer his? If control had always been an illusion? And then the emotional wave crashed. A single message, they know. Nothing more. No context. No mercy. He stumbled back to the ledger, fingers tracing names like a ritual. Each connection a knife edge balancing danger and opportunity. And in that moment, he realized something terrifying. His identity, the persona built over decades, could be erased by one overlooked thread. The city outside pulsed with life, indifferent to his crisis. And yet, the storm inside mirrored the storm outside. The truth was unraveling. Voices rose. Screens burned. Allegiances broke. And in the eye of it all, he understood, the ledger wasn't just revealing secrets. It was awakening the world to them. You felt this once, didn't you? The gnawing sensation that everything familiar was gone. And that survival required more than wit. It demanded courage. And clarity. By midnight, the storm peaked. It didn't care about money, fame, or influence. It only cared about movement, revelation, exposure. Every decision now echoed across unseen networks. Every misstep amplified by connections he hadn't realized existed. And he was human. Fragile. Vulnerable. Alone in a room full of power. Yet beneath the chaos, a small light flickered. Possibility. Strategy. A way forward. Because storms pass. And those who endure emerge transformed. Not stronger, not invincible. But awake. Freedom isn't inherited. It's practiced. And maybe, this is where everything begins again. Dawn arrived slowly. A thin light spilled over the skyline, turning glass towers into mirrors of orange and gray. The city exhaled. The storm outside had passed. Inside, a different calm settled, fragile, deliberate, human. He sat alone in the penthouse, the ledger closed now, resting like a sleeping beast. His hands traced the edges of the pages, worn from decades of curiosity and ambition. Everything had changed. Everything had been revealed. Freedom isn't inherited. It's practiced. The echoes of the storm lingered. Screens flickered with fragments of truth. Voices murmured across diners and highways. But he understood something fundamental: the world was not ending. It was awakening. You've seen this before. The moment after chaos, when clarity finally pierces the fog. The silence that carries weight because every choice still matters. He thought about the ledger. Not as a weapon. Not as a map of power. But as a mirror. It reflected everything he had done, the ambition, the mistakes, the compromises. And it reflected the choices still possible. The city outside moved on. Commuters poured into coffee shops. A bus rumbled past a diner where a waitress stacked plates. Somewhere, a dog barked. Life went forward. Indifferent. Persistent. So when your moment comes, what will you choose to become? He rose and walked to the balcony. The air was crisp. The wind carried the scent of asphalt and river water. He closed his eyes. And for the first time in a long time, he breathed. It wasn't victory he felt. It wasn't relief. It was understanding. He had been part of a system far larger than himself. He had faced its consequences. And now, he could navigate forward, armed not with illusion, but with awareness. And maybe, this is where everything begins again. The ledger rested quietly on the desk, waiting. Not for scandal. Not for power. But for someone ready to see clearly. To act responsibly. To learn the delicate balance between knowledge and choice. The man turned away from the skyline. He didn't smile. He didn't frown. He simply understood. And in that understanding, there was a fragile hope. Because storms end. Revelations fade. And humanity, messy, complicated, beautiful, endures. The city, waking beneath the soft light, carried on. And so would he. The city had calmed, but calm was an illusion. Beneath the streets, in offices and alleys, in late-night diners and dim apartments, the threads of the storm were still alive. Connections stirred. Whispers multiplied. And the ledger, it waited quietly, patient as ever. He walked through the empty penthouse, tracing the reflections in the windows. The skyline looked peaceful, innocent even. But he knew better. You know this feeling. The quiet before a second wave, the sensation that what appears resolved is merely paused. Messages he thought were deleted reappeared. A photograph, once overlooked, revealed a shadow that didn't belong. An email flagged itself in his inbox, anonymous and urgent. And someone was watching. Always watching. At first, he tried to shrug it off. Coincidence. Misinterpretation. Paranoia. But the ledger had taught him that nothing was ever accidental. There was always a pattern. Always a system. Always a hand guiding events from the shadows. You felt this before. The creeping doubt that everything you've seen is only a fragment of what exists. He called an old ally. No answer. A trusted aide appeared in the hallway, hesitant, speaking carefully. Something's shifting, she said. And that was all. Nothing more. Yet it was everything. Outside, the city moved forward. Morning commuters, delivery trucks, the hiss of coffee machines, neon signs blinking in rhythm. No one noticed the subtle currents weaving between the ordinary moments. No one felt the pulse of the unseen system rearranging itself. And then the first microhook appeared. A name, familiar yet forgotten, emerged in conversation. Not in news feeds, not in official reports, but in whispers. A connection he had dismissed years ago. A detail everyone had missed. The tension tightened around him like a cord. Every decision carried weight. Every interaction could trigger a cascade. And every pause was dangerous. You felt this once, didn't you? The knowledge that history has a way of repeating itself, subtly, cruelly, inevitably. He stared out at the city, the morning sun glinting on steel and glass. And realized, the storm had never truly ended. It had only shifted its shape. And somewhere, deep in the shadows of influence, the ledger pulsed again. Not loudly. Not aggressively. But quietly, deliberately, like a heartbeat in the dark. And with it, the unspoken truth. The story was far from over. And he understood, he would have to move again. Carefully. Strategically. Because the system, once revealed, didn't forgive ignorance. And the real game was only just beginning. By midday, the city hummed with ordinary noise. Traffic flowed. Coffee brewed. Voices carried across sidewalks. But beneath that hum, under the ordinary, a second pattern had emerged. A detail overlooked. A name repeated across multiple whispers. A connection no one had noticed, until now. He sat in the penthouse, the ledger open again, pages catching sunlight. Every line, every notation, seemed to breathe. You've seen this before. The moment when you realize the rules you relied on were written by someone else. A call came through, no voice, just a click. The kind of message that meant someone was testing you. Not with words. With presence. And he felt it immediately. The storm wasn't over. It had shifted to a subtler, sharper form. He reviewed old interactions. Meetings he barely remembered now seemed loaded with new meaning. A handshake. A passing comment. A photograph taken in jest. Every memory, every casual detail, suddenly became a puzzle piece. And then came the microhook. An unfamiliar figure appeared on a security feed. No one knew them. They moved deliberately. Purposefully. And for reasons he couldn't yet see, they were connected. Outside, the city carried on, indifferent to the growing tension. Late-night diners were open. Highways carried traffic. Somewhere, a dog barked. And yet, invisible currents tugged at everyone, subtly, quietly, inevitably. You know this feeling, he thought. The sense that the world is slightly off balance, that every decision now echoes further than expected. That every glance, every message, every seemingly innocuous event could change everything. He tried to regain control. A meeting. A phone call. An old contact, half trusted, half unknown, gave him a fragment of information. Fragment enough to disturb the equilibrium. Fragment enough to force him into action. The ledger lay there, silent, powerful, patient. It was no longer merely a map. It was a guide. A warning. And a test. You felt this before. The tension of understanding, that nothing is random, and the smallest oversight can trigger a cascade of consequences. The city outside remained unaware. But inside offices, apartments, and penthouses, the game had changed. A move here. A misstep there. All the pieces were shifting. And he understood, the escalation wasn't external. It was internal. The stakes weren't just power, influence, or reputation. They were knowledge, awareness, survival. By dusk, subtle alarms rang. Phones buzzed. Lights flickered. The first ripple of panic, measured, controlled, almost imperceptible, spread through the network. And somewhere, in a quiet office or dim apartment, the ledger pulsed once more. Waiting. Watching. The game was escalating. And the man knew, nothing would ever be ordinary again. The city looked normal. From the rooftops, it glittered in sunlight, orderly and familiar. But fractures had begun. Invisible lines splitting routines, connections, trust. He moved through his penthouse like a ghost. The ledger sat open on the desk, pages marked by subtle fingerprints. Every name, every detail, seemed alive. And the system, the network of hidden currents, hummed quietly beneath the surface. At first, nothing seemed wrong. Emails were sent. Meetings held. Smiles given. Yet every interaction carried weight. Every gesture risked exposure. A photograph surfaced. Cropped incorrectly. A shadow in the corner didn't belong. It wasn't a mistake. It was a signal. You've seen this before. The quiet moment when cracks appear. When control, no matter how absolute, begins to fracture. He traced old phone calls. Voices misremembered details. Alliances shifted subtly, almost imperceptibly. A trusted aide hesitated, words faltering, eyes flickering. Something was changing. Something that could not be predicted. And then came the first mini-twist. An old ledger entry he had dismissed revealed a link. A person thought harmless, neutral, suddenly pivotal. Connections that seemed solid now dissolved under scrutiny. Outside, the city moved on. Coffee brewed. Traffic rumbled. News feeds updated. No one noticed the fractures. No one felt the invisible strings pulling, twisting, reshaping the ordinary. You know this feeling, he thought. The gnawing tension of realizing your world is fragile. That everything you relied on may be false. He tried to act. A phone call. A meeting. An email carefully drafted. But the system responded unpredictably. Every move created ripples. Every attempt to repair one fracture opened another. By nightfall, subtle chaos reigned. A misinterpreted text. A hesitant conversation. A photograph circulating in private channels. The cracks spread quietly. And he realized, he could no longer predict outcomes. The ledger pulsed on the desk. Pages waiting, silent, patient. And the man understood, survival no longer depended solely on ambition or influence. It depended on awareness. On adaptability. On reading the invisible currents before they struck. And somewhere, in the hidden network, another fracture was forming. A choice being made, a loyalty tested, a system bending further. He exhaled slowly. The storm wasn't over. It had evolved. And he knew, in the quiet of the penthouse, that everything was about to shift again. The game had entered a new phase. One where perception mattered more than power. Where knowledge was survival. And where the ledger would reveal its next truth, whether he was ready or not. By midnight, the city pulsed with quiet urgency. Streetlights reflected on wet asphalt. Sirens wailed in the distance. No one truly noticed the patterns shifting beneath ordinary life. He sat alone in the penthouse, the ledger before him, pages marked by subtle fingerprints and fading ink. Every name, every connection, seemed to vibrate with unseen energy. You felt this before. The weight of invisible threads stretching across your world, tugging at your attention, your decisions, your survival. A ripple moved through the network. Small at first. Barely noticeable. A meeting cancelled. An unexpected visitor at an office downtown. A whisper across a diner counter. At first glance, it seemed insignificant. But significance hides in the smallest details. And he noticed. Always noticed. You've asked this question too. Who was moving the pieces? Who was orchestrating the next turn? And how much had already been decided without his knowledge? He traced old files, emails, and photographs. Patterns emerged, subtle, precise, almost surgical. Connections that once seemed random now glimmered with intent. A name previously dismissed returned, now pivotal. A photograph misfiled suddenly became proof of something unthinkable. Outside, the city slept unaware. Taxis hummed. Dogs barked. Neon lights pulsed. But the ripple spread quietly, infecting conversations, shaking confidence, revealing hidden allegiances. He tried to regain control. A carefully worded message. A phone call to a trusted associate. But every action created further ripples. Every effort to stabilize only accelerated change. You know this feeling. The world around you moving faster than your comprehension. And the ledger, patient, deliberate, pulsed like a heartbeat in the dark. It didn't judge. It didn't panic. It only revealed what had always existed. And then came the mini twist. A photograph appeared in private channels. An unrecognized face. A subtle shadow in the background. Someone had noticed before he did. Someone had begun to act. The fractures widened. Trust became conditional. Alliances trembled. And he realized, survival was no longer a game of influence or charisma. It was a game of awareness. Outside, the wind carried whispers. A door closed somewhere. A camera clicked. And somewhere, the ledger waited. Silent. Patient. Indispensable. He understood the truth, the storm wasn't coming. It had already begun. And the ripple, once started, could not be stopped. Because the ledger didn't reveal merely names. It revealed inevitabilities. Connections. Consequences. And for the first time, he realized that the game he thought he controlled had already decided the next move. The city slept, but it wasn't quiet. Beneath the asphalt, under the flickering streetlights, currents moved, invisible, deliberate, unstoppable. Every whispered conversation, every overlooked message, every glance in a hallway carried weight. He stood by the window, hands pressed against cool glass. The ledger lay open on the desk, pages fluttering as if breathing. And he understood something he hadn't before. He was no longer the architect. He was part of a larger design, moving with the rhythm of hidden currents. You know this feeling. The subtle realization that everything you thought was solid, familiar, and safe is only a fragment of a greater system. It started with small anomalies. A meeting cancelled without explanation. A report appearing in the wrong inbox. A photograph misfiled, then reappearing in private channels. At first, he dismissed them. Random mistakes. Coincidences. But then patterns emerged. Deliberate patterns. And the ledger had mapped them all, patiently, silently, waiting. A mini twist revealed itself. A name previously insignificant now became central. An ally thought loyal began acting with hesitation. And someone, unknown, unseen, had begun making moves that could no longer be ignored. He reached out, cautiously. Calls. Messages. Meetings. Every action felt like stepping on thin ice. And every response, delayed, measured, revealed more than intended. The city outside remained indifferent. Trains rumbled. Coffee brewed. Neon lights flickered. No one noticed the currents weaving beneath the surface. No one realized the invisible architecture guiding their actions. You've seen this before. The moment when ordinary life fractures under unseen pressure. When decisions, once casual, now carry disproportionate weight. The ledger pulsed like a heartbeat. Not loud. Not urgent. But deliberate. Patient. Insistent. And the man realized the paradox. He had spent decades believing he controlled the narrative. But control had always been an illusion. And the ledger, the system, was indifferent to belief. It revealed only inevitabilities. Outside, shadows lengthened. Footsteps echoed in empty hallways. A door clicked shut. And somewhere, quietly, the first move of a larger scheme was underway. He exhaled slowly, realizing the truth. Power was never about influence. It was about awareness. And awareness required vigilance, humility, and the courage to act before the currents swept everything away. The storm had shifted, evolved. It was no longer chaotic. It was precise. And the ledger, patient, deliberate, unyielding, would expose it all. And he understood. The next revelation would not wait for him to be ready. It would arrive. And he would have to respond. The city hummed, indifferent to the collision forming beneath its streets. Traffic lights changed. Horns honked. Pedestrians passed each other without notice. But beneath the ordinary, currents converged. Paths crossed. Secrets overlapped. Timelines fractured. He paced the penthouse, ledger open, tracing connections he hadn't noticed before. A name here, a date there, a photograph long dismissed, all forming an invisible lattice. And the realization struck, the network was accelerating. Patterns that once unfolded slowly now moved at lightning speed. You know this feeling. The moment when threads you thought were separate suddenly collide. When consequences multiply exponentially. At first, he tried to control it. Phone calls, meetings, messages carefully timed and measured. But the system responded unpredictably. A trusted associate faltered. A supposed ally acted without warning. And a new figure, unknown, deliberate, entered the frame. Many twists emerged. A ledger entry he had never seen surfaced. A meeting thought inconsequential now carried enormous weight. And an email, misdirected, revealed information that could topple long-held assumptions. Outside, the city continued its rhythm. Diners buzzed with chatter. Highways carried endless streams of cars. And yet, the invisible architecture of influence and power pressed quietly against everyone, shaping outcomes no one could see. You've asked this question too. Who moves when the system shifts? Who reacts? And who becomes the unintended consequence? He understood the paradox. For decades, he had believed he could manipulate outcomes. Now, he realized, he was moving within a larger structure. A structure that didn't bend for ambition. A structure that revealed truth in subtle ways, and punished mistakes silently, immediately. The ledger pulsed once more. A name illuminated in ink. A path highlighted among dozens of branching lines. It wasn't instructions. It was inevitability. And the storm, no longer visible, but undeniable, pressed closer. Every microdecision carried risk. Every delayed response multiplied consequences. And the convergence was nearing its peak. He paused. Breathed. And for a moment, saw clearly. The currents weren't chaotic. They were deliberate. A test of perception, awareness, and courage. And if he failed to act decisively, the consequences would cascade far beyond his comprehension. Outside, a shadow moved across a rooftop. Inside, a phone buzzed. The ledger waited. And the man understood the truth. The convergence had arrived. And he would have to respond. Because the game, the system, didn't forgive hesitation. It didn't reward arrogance. It only exposed those who failed to see the currents moving beneath their feet. And for the first time, he knew, the story had entered a phase where observation was survival. Where knowledge was weapon. Where patience could be deadly. The city slept. But the storm was fully awake. The city seemed oblivious. Neon signs blinked. Engines hummed. Coffee machines hissed. Ordinary life pressed forward. But inside the penthouse, tension coiled like a spring. The ledger lay open, its pages a web of inevitabilities. Every line a pulse. Every name a moving piece. He had always believed he controlled the narrative. Now, he realized control was a mirage. A perception designed to soothe ambition. And the truth was stark: someone, something, was already acting on moves he hadn't anticipated. You know this feeling. The sudden awareness that a misstep can cascade into irreversible consequences. The pressure point had arrived. Emails he thought secure were being read by unseen eyes. Voicemails, long dismissed, contained subtle hints. And a photograph surfaced in private channels, cropped poorly, but enough. Enough to force hesitation. Enough to demand immediate action. A trusted ally appeared in the hallway, hesitant, eyes darting. "Something's happening," she said. And that was all. But it was everything. Many twists compounded. A previously insignificant ledger entry aligned perfectly with a real-world meeting. A shadow in the background of a photograph now became evidence of movement. And a third figure, unseen until now, started to intersect with his network. You've asked this question too. Who is acting? Who is watching? And who will define the outcome before you can respond? He tried to act. Phone calls, messages, meetings, each carefully considered, precise. But every step forward created ripples he hadn't accounted for. Every attempt at containment only amplified the tension. Outside, the city continued its rhythm. Diners, buses, pedestrians, unaware. And yet, in hidden offices, apartments, and corners of the city, the system moved with silent precision. The ledger pulsed again. Pages flipped under an invisible hand. Names illuminated. Paths converged. And the man understood: the pressure point was no longer abstract. It was here. It was immediate. It demanded a response. A decision had to be made. Every hesitation risked exposure. Every miscalculation could trigger chaos. And he felt the weight of decades of ambition compressed into a single moment. You know this feeling, he thought. The edge of survival, the thin line between awareness and catastrophe. The storm outside was calm. The storm inside was total. And somewhere, quietly, the ledger waited. Patient. Relentless. And unforgiving. Because the pressure point doesn't warn. It doesn't negotiate. It only reveals. And punishes. Those who are unprepared. The city slept, unaware of the storm unfolding above, beneath, and within. Streetlights cast long shadows. Windows reflected faces caught in fleeting thought. And inside the penthouse, a reckoning was underway. The ledger lay open, a lattice of inevitability. Every name, every connection, every notation pulsed with purpose. It was no longer a map. It was a mirror, reflecting not just others, but himself. And the reflection was unforgiving. You've seen this before. The moment when the weight of all choices converges. When the consequences of ambition, oversight, and miscalculation strike simultaneously. Many twists arrived like sharp gusts of wind. A photograph circulated in private channels, the angle revealing a detail no one should have known. A message intended for someone else reached him first. And a new figure, deliberate, calculated, unseen, intersected his network. He moved through the penthouse, hands pressed against glass, staring at the city. Every decision now mattered. Every delay was dangerous. Every conversation carried potential catastrophe. You know this feeling, he thought. The suffocating awareness that the game you've played for decades is no longer under your control. And that survival depends not on influence, but on perception. He tried to anticipate the system. Phone calls, emails, old contacts, all analyzed, measured, timed. But the ledger, patient and relentless, revealed new patterns faster than he could act. The fractures he had seen before widened into chasms. Outside, the city continued its rhythm. Taxi horns, distant sirens, the hum of life, indifferent to hidden currents. And yet, in the unseen architecture of power, the storm had reached its apex. A critical choice appeared. One decision, immediate, unavoidable, could change everything. And he realized the paradox: every option carried risk. Every outcome was uncertain. And yet, action was the only path forward. You've asked this question too. Do you move? Do you wait? And what will the ledger reveal if you hesitate? He exhaled, steadying himself. The reckoning wasn't just external. It was internal. The ledger reflected not just the system, but his own capacity to navigate it. To respond. To survive. Pages turned. Names aligned. Paths intersected. The storm inside mirrored the storm outside. And he understood, the game had entered its final phase. Not of chaos. Not of chance. But of consequence. The city slept. The storm had arrived. And he was ready, or as ready as anyone could be when the ledger decides the rules. The city awoke, unaware that the storm had already swept through its veins. Buses rumbled. Coffee machines hissed. Pedestrians hurried past, oblivious. But inside offices, apartments, and the penthouse, the first cracks were visible. He stared at the ledger. Pages open. Connections illuminated. And suddenly, the carefully constructed illusion of control began to fray. You know this feeling. The world around you, familiar and secure, suddenly trembling. The certainty you relied on dissolving before your eyes. Many twists appeared without warning. A name previously thought harmless carried sudden weight. A photograph, innocuous at first glance, revealed a shadow that didn't belong. A phone call went unanswered, signaling more than absence, signaling intention. The ripple effects spread fast. Allies hesitated. Associates faltered. Messages misaligned. And the ledger, patient, deliberate, waited. Tracking, reflecting, guiding, exposing. You've asked this question too. Who is moving unseen? Who is manipulating the threads without recognition? And what will be lost in the unfolding chaos? He tried to regain control. Calls, meetings, emails, every action calculated. Yet every response created new ripples. Every attempt to stabilize only revealed more fractures. Outside, the city hummed its ordinary rhythm. Trains, taxis, neon lights, footsteps, unaware of invisible currents. And yet, the fractures beneath ordinary life spread, imperceptible but relentless. He felt it now. The ledger's pulse was undeniable. The convergence, the escalation, the pressure point, all coalescing into one undeniable truth. The system didn't forgive mistakes. It didn't reward hesitation. It only revealed outcomes. The first failures appeared. An ally betrayed by miscommunication. A secret exposed in private channels. A name misaligned with expectations. And he realized, the unraveling wasn't just external. It was internal. Every choice, every hesitation, every misstep reflected back, amplified. The storm had returned. Not visible. Not loud. But undeniable. Relentless. And he knew, deep in his chest, that the ledger's truth would continue to unfold. Regardless of his readiness. He exhaled slowly. The unraveling had begun. And there was no turning back. The night was quiet. Too quiet. Streetlights flickered. The city moved, unaware, indifferent. But inside the penthouse, every second carried weight. He leaned over the ledger, tracing connections like lines of code. Every name, every note, every page pulsed with unseen energy. And the realization hit: the system didn't wait. It didn't pause. It acted, indifferent to readiness, expectation, or fear. You know this feeling. The moment when urgency overwhelms thought. When inaction is no longer an option. When every microdecision becomes a pivot point. A mini-twist revealed itself. A message misdelivered. A shadow in a photograph that had gone unnoticed. An email that exposed more than intended. And suddenly, someone he trusted was no longer on his side. Outside, the city hummed its normal rhythm. Trains, buses, pedestrians, diners, oblivious. But in hidden corners, offices, and apartments, the currents surged. The unseen forces pressing, testing, shaping outcomes. You've asked this question too. Who moves first? Who reacts? And who suffers if hesitation wins? He made a choice. Not a perfect choice. Not a calculated choice. But a decision, immediate, irrevocable, necessary. The ledger pulsed, patient, deliberate. Names aligned. Connections highlighted. Paths revealed. It didn't approve. It didn't judge. It only revealed: this was the move that mattered. Consequences followed instantly. An ally faltered. A thread snapped. A message spread, unseen by most, carrying weight no one anticipated. The system, once abstract, theoretical, became tangible. Unyielding. Relentless. And he realized the paradox. Control had never been about power. It had always been about awareness. About recognizing the currents and navigating them before they navigate you. The storm was no longer external. It was internal. Every hesitation, every calculation, every instinct challenged, tested. And the ledger continued to pulse. Patient. Relentless. True. By dawn, he understood the stakes. Not survival. Not reputation. But clarity. And the courage to act in the face of a system that never stops moving. Because the critical juncture waits for no one. And the ledger, patient, deliberate, unforgiving, never forgets. By afternoon, the city thrummed with life. People moved, oblivious, beneath the weight of invisible currents. Cars honked. Coffee machines hissed. Office chatter carried. Ordinary. Familiar. And yet, beneath it all, a spiral had begun. He stood over the ledger, tracing lines that now seemed alive. Connections, once static, shifted. Names he trusted now intersected with unknown forces. Every decision he'd made, every action, every hesitation, rippled outward. The spiral was unstoppable. You know this feeling. The moment when everything you thought was stable begins to twist. When momentum no longer waits for understanding. And consequences accelerate faster than comprehension. Mini-twists struck relentlessly. A photograph revealed a hidden figure. A misdirected email exposed a secret long buried. An ally's loyalty wavered, imperceptibly at first, then with unmistakable certainty. He tried to anticipate. Calls, messages, meetings, every maneuver precise. But the spiral ignored precision. It amplified hesitation. It punished miscalculation. And the ledger pulsed, patient, deliberate, guiding him through each twist. You've asked this question too. Who is orchestrating this from the shadows? Who benefits from the spiraling chaos? And what will break first, the system, or him? Outside, the city moved forward as if nothing had changed. Taxis, subways, neon lights, pedestrians, unaware of the forces twisting beneath their daily routines. Yet each ripple intersected with another, creating patterns no one could anticipate. The first fractures appeared visibly. An email sent in confidence exposed to multiple channels. A message intended for a friend reached an unintended audience. A meeting misaligned with time, revealing vulnerability. And he realized the spiral wasn't just external. It was internal. The tension, the pressure, the stakes, all amplified within himself. Every instinct questioned. Every choice scrutinized. Every hesitation could trigger disaster. The ledger pulsed again. Paths aligned, diverged, recombined. It didn't judge. It didn't warn. It only revealed inevitability. And he understood, the spiral couldn't be stopped. Only navigated. Only endured. And even then, survival wasn't guaranteed. Because momentum, once unleashed, carries consequences beyond comprehension. And in that spiral, clarity is the only lifeline. The city hummed. The storm had returned. And he stood at the center, aware, alert, and profoundly human. Night fell over the city, but darkness did not hide the truth. Streetlights flickered. Neon signs buzzed. Windows reflected lives unaware of the currents beneath them. And inside the penthouse, a revelation waited. He leaned over the ledger. Connections once invisible now glimmered with meaning. Every decision, every hesitation, every misstep coalesced into clarity. The system, patient and relentless, had revealed its design. You know this feeling. The instant when uncertainty sharpens into insight. When patterns snap into focus. When what seemed random is, in fact, deliberate. Many twists surfaced suddenly. A photograph previously dismissed now revealed a key figure. An email, overlooked for months, illuminated intent. A familiar ally acted unexpectedly, revealing an unknown agenda. The spiral of consequences now aligned. No longer random, no longer chaotic, deliberate. The turning point demanded action. And he could no longer hesitate. You've asked this question too. Who controls the unseen forces? Who defines outcomes when chaos intersects with intention? And who will survive the revelations now unfolding? Outside, the city continued its rhythm. Diners hummed. Cars rumbled. Office lights flickered. Ordinary life pressed forward. But the currents beneath had shifted. Irrevocably. He exhaled, recognizing the paradox. Control had never been absolute. Influence had never been guaranteed. Survival depended on understanding the system, and moving decisively within it. The ledger pulsed once more. Paths converged. Names aligned. Secrets revealed. It didn't judge. It didn't demand loyalty. It only revealed inevitability. And he understood. The turning point wasn't a moment of chaos. It was a moment of clarity. A moment of decision. A moment when knowledge became action, and hesitation could be fatal. He stood at the window. The city stretched endlessly before him. Ordinary. Indifferent. Unaware. And yet, in the ledger's quiet illumination, he saw the true architecture of events. The hidden currents, the converging threads, the system that never rests. And he moved. Decisively. Aware that nothing would ever be the same. The spiral had sharpened. The convergence had arrived. And the storm, subtle, precise, unrelenting, was finally fully visible. The morning was deceptively calm. Sunlight spilled over streets. Engines purred. Coffee brewed. Pedestrians moved, unaware of the invisible storm surging beneath their steps. Inside the penthouse, the ledger pulsed like a heartbeat. Every page a trigger. Every name a node. And now, the turning point had rippled outward. Consequences cascaded. You know this feeling. The moment when one revelation spawns another. When clarity creates pressure. When every micro-decision compounds into something unstoppable. Many twists arrived rapidly. A photograph revealed a hidden meeting. A misfiled message exposed a secret alliance. An ally's hesitation now became a liability. And an unknown figure moved deliberately through the network, unseen, unpredictable, unstoppable. He acted, cautiously but decisively. Phone calls, messages, meetings, every maneuver measured. Yet every action created new waves. Every attempt to stabilize the system only amplified its momentum. You've asked this question too. Who benefits from the chaos? Who loses? And who can navigate the fallout before it consumes everything? Outside, the city hummed on. Taxis, subways, pedestrians, neon lights, ordinary. Invisible currents twisted beneath, shifting outcomes no one anticipated. The ledger pulsed again, deliberate, patient. Paths converged and diverged simultaneously. Names aligned with events he hadn't predicted. And he realized, the system was beyond control. It was reactive, adaptive, precise. It revealed consequences faster than he could respond. Fractures became visible. Alliances strained. Secrets exposed. Mistakes magnified. And the spiral of causality tightened. You know this feeling. The edge of understanding, when pressure becomes action. And action triggers consequences you cannot fully anticipate. He exhaled. The turning point had passed. The cascade had begun. And the storm, silent but unrelenting, would not relent until all threads were revealed. The city moved on. Oblivious. Ordinary. And yet, nothing would ever be ordinary again. The city roared with ordinary life. Cars honked. Subway doors clanged. Coffee machines hissed. And yet, inside hidden offices, apartments, and the penthouse, the world had shifted. The currents were visible now, deliberate, precise, unstoppable. He stood over the ledger. Pages illuminated. Names aligned. Connections revealed. The ripple effects of the turning point had escalated into confrontation. No longer abstract. No longer distant. The stakes were immediate. You know this feeling. The edge where awareness meets action. The moment when hesitation is a liability. And every choice carries irreversible weight. Many twists arrived with alarming precision. A trusted ally acted unpredictably. A misdirected message revealed intentions long concealed. An unknown figure moved through the network with perfect timing. And suddenly, the balance of control had shifted. He had to respond. Phone calls, messages, face-to-face meetings, every step measured, deliberate, critical. Every action triggered new ripples. Every decision risked exposure. And the ledger, patient and relentless, pulsed with inevitability. You've asked this question too. Who is orchestrating the forces unseen? Who decides outcomes when chaos intersects with intention? And who will survive the fallout now in motion? Outside, the city remained indifferent. Taxis, subways, pedestrians, neon lights, ordinary. Yet every thread of influence now collided. Every secret revealed. Every alliance tested. Fractures widened. Trust faltered. Mistakes multiplied. And the spiral of consequences tightened like a vice. He paused, exhaling slowly, realizing the paradox. Control had never been about power. It had always been about awareness, perception, and decisive action. And now, at the confrontation point, everything depended on his ability to navigate the currents before they navigated him. The ledger pulsed again. Paths converged. Names aligned. Secrets exposed. It didn't judge. It didn't warn. It only revealed the inevitable. And he understood, the confrontation wasn't external. It wasn't a fight. It was a test. A test of perception. A test of awareness. A test of survival. The city moved on, unaware. But inside, the storm was total. And he was in its eye. The city awoke, unaware of the battle that had already been fought in shadow. Traffic flowed. Coffee brewed. Voices echoed across sidewalks. Ordinary. Familiar. Safe. And yet, nothing would ever feel ordinary again. He sat at the penthouse desk, the ledger open, pages glowing softly in the early light. The confrontation had passed. But the echoes lingered. Every decision, every micro-twist, every ripple of consequence had left a mark. You know this feeling. The weight of choices finally realized. The gravity of what was done, and what could no longer be undone. Many twists emerged in subtle ways. A trusted ally no longer spoke freely. A message meant to reassure instead revealed doubt. And an unseen figure, moving quietly, left footprints that no one would fully understand. Outside, the city continued its rhythm. Buses rumbled. Neon signs flickered. Ordinary life pressed on, oblivious to invisible currents that had shifted reality. You've asked this question too. What survives confrontation? What fractures? And who emerges changed, irrevocably, by the storm? He traced the ledger's lines again. Connections, once fluid, now seemed frozen. Names aligned with events, evidence of movement, consequence, inevitability. And he understood, the aftermath wasn't chaos. It was clarity. A map of reality as it now existed. The first fractures were visible. Allies hesitant. Decisions reconsidered. A photograph revealed what had been hidden. A shadow in the wrong place became undeniable. He exhaled. The confrontation had not destroyed him. But it had changed everything. Awareness now carried weight beyond strategy. Every action now bore consequence. Every choice could trigger a ripple. The storm had passed in form, but not in essence. The currents remained. The ledger pulsed. And he knew, deep within, that the system had only just begun revealing its truths. Outside, the city moved on, ordinary and indifferent. But inside, in quiet rooms, in hidden offices, in the minds of those who had acted, everything had shifted. And somewhere, in the soft light of dawn, he realized. The true aftermath wasn't destruction. It was transformation. And it demanded vigilance, perception, and the courage to act in a world that would never again feel ordinary. The city moved as if nothing had changed. Streetlights blinked. Engines purred. Conversations carried. Ordinary. Familiar. Safe. But beneath that facade, consequences multiplied. He returned to the ledger. Pages now glowed brighter, connections sharper. Every thread of influence, every hidden move, every secret unfolded in stark clarity. The confrontation was over. The reckoning had only just begun. You know this feeling. When the weight of choices extends beyond yourself. When every ripple touches lives you didn't anticipate. And every decision becomes a question of survival and morality. Many twists appeared, subtle but deadly. An ally acted unpredictably. A photograph, long dismissed, revealed an unanticipated connection. A misdirected message exposed a hidden agenda. And an unknown actor moved through the network with precision. You've asked this question too. Who benefits from the chaos? Who falters under pressure? And who emerges from the shadows stronger than before? Outside, the city hummed with life. Diners buzzed. Buses rumbled. Neon signs flickered. Ordinary rhythms continued. Yet beneath them, currents accelerated, invisible but relentless. He traced the ledger lines, observing how consequences now intersected. What had once seemed minor now carried weight. Fractures widened. Trust trembled. Secrets came alive. And he realized, survival required more than awareness. It required anticipation. The first cracks of the expanded reckoning were visible. Small mistakes amplified into vulnerabilities. Minor oversights exposed hidden truths. And every action, deliberate or accidental, carried consequence. He exhaled slowly. The confrontation had reshaped reality. But the expansion of its consequences demanded a higher level of focus. A new kind of clarity. A readiness for the unexpected. The ledger pulsed again. Paths converged and diverged, names highlighted in stark clarity. It didn't judge. It didn't forgive. It only revealed truth. And truth, in its quiet inevitability, now moved faster than anyone could react. Outside, the city carried on, indifferent. Inside, he knew the storm was far from over. The reckoning had expanded. And in that expansion lay danger, revelation, and the unmistakable truth: nothing would ever return to ordinary. The city breathed in its usual rhythm. Engines hummed. Neon signs buzzed. Sidewalks thrummed with ordinary life. But inside hidden offices, apartments, and the penthouse, pressure had reached a crescendo. He stared at the ledger. Pages glowed, connections sharp and unyielding. Every decision, every hesitation, every ripple of consequence had amplified into near-perfect tension. The confrontation, the aftermath, the expanded reckoning, all had led here. You know this feeling. The edge where urgency becomes suffocating. Where clarity collides with chaos. Where a single misstep carries irreversible consequences. Many twists appeared relentlessly. An ally's loyalty fractured under strain. A photograph, previously dismissed, exposed a connection that destabilized the network. Messages meant to reassure now revealed hidden agendas. And an unseen figure maneuvered with calculated precision. You've asked this question too. Who moves when the system tightens? Who acts when hesitation is fatal? And who will survive the forces now converging? He acted. Every phone call, every message, every step measured and deliberate. Yet every action triggered new ripples, more intense than before. The ledger pulsed, patient, deliberate, indifferent. It revealed patterns, outcomes, inevitabilities. It did not forgive. It did not relent. Fractures became visible and irreparable. Trust trembled. Alliances faltered. Secrets multiplied. And the spiral of consequences constricted like a vice. He paused, inhaled, exhaled. Awareness alone was no longer sufficient. Action had to be decisive. And every choice had to account for the unseen forces moving faster than human perception. The storm was total. Invisible currents intersected everywhere. Paths converged and collided. And he realized, the system did not break. It only tested. It only exposed. And at the peak of pressure, only clarity, courage, and decisiveness could guide survival. The city moved on, oblivious. The ledger pulsed. The pressure peaked. And he stood in the eye of inevitability, fully aware that the next move would define everything. The city exhaled under the late afternoon sun. Buses hummed. Coffee machines hissed. Neon signs flickered. Life moved as if nothing had changed. Yet beneath the ordinary, the currents had shifted. The storm had passed, but its echoes remained. He returned to the ledger, now quiet but alive. Connections illuminated paths previously hidden. Every ripple, every fracture, every consequence now aligned. The confrontation, the spiral, the expanded reckoning, all had reached resolution. You know this feeling. The moment when chaos dissolves into clarity. When the storm's lessons emerge in sharp relief. When the consequences of choices reveal the truth you've long avoided. Many twists lingered, subtle and instructive. An ally, once hesitant, now revealed loyalty. A message, misinterpreted, clarified intention. And a photograph, once obscure, illuminated hidden patterns. The system, patient and relentless, had revealed its final state. You've asked this question too. What survives confrontation? What endures after pressure peaks? And who emerges transformed, not broken, by the storm? Outside, the city moved on, oblivious. Yet inside, a quiet understanding took root. The ledger had not only revealed inevitability. It had revealed perception. Awareness. Responsibility. He exhaled. The storm had tested him. It had exposed fractures. It had amplified consequences. But it had also clarified paths forward. The currents remained, subtle, invisible, persistent. Yet now they were understood. Measured. Navigable. And in that understanding lay power. Not the power of control. But the power of insight. The storm was no longer a threat. It had become a teacher. And he realized, survival was never about dominance. It was about awareness. Decision. Courage. The ledger pulsed softly, almost imperceptibly. Paths converged one final time. The system, silent now, had spoken. And he knew, finally, that the story, the reckoning, had reached its conclusion. Outside, the city moved on. Oblivious, ordinary, alive. And inside, he sat quietly, aware, reflective, prepared. Because clarity, once earned, cannot be undone. And perhaps, this was where everything truly began again. The night fell quietly over the city. Streetlights glimmered. Neon signs buzzed softly. Cars hummed along highways. Life went on, ordinary, familiar, alive. Inside the penthouse, he closed the ledger. Pages no longer glowed. Connections no longer pulsed. The currents had shifted, the storm had passed, and clarity remained. You know this feeling. The quiet after chaos. The moment when the world moves forward, and yet you carry the weight of everything that has happened. When survival, insight, and consequence settle into understanding. Many twists lingered as lessons, subtle reminders. Allies had faltered, secrets had surfaced, mistakes had multiplied, yet each revealed a truth. A photograph still held significance. A message still whispered intention. And the unseen figures had left marks that would resonate forever. You've asked this question too. What remains after the storm? What endures when consequences unfold? And how do you move forward, carrying knowledge no one else possesses? He rose and walked to the window. The city stretched endlessly before him, indifferent, unchanging, ordinary. And yet, beneath its calm, he knew the currents still moved. Patterns persisted. Paths converged and diverged. The system was alive. Patient. Persistent. And he was awake to it all. He exhaled. Freedom wasn't given. It wasn't inherited. It was practiced. And awareness, decisiveness, and courage were the currency of survival. The ledger's pulse was gone, but its lessons remained. And he understood, every storm leaves echoes. Every confrontation leaves insight. Every system, once unraveled, leaves a path forward for those willing to see. The city slept, unaware. Ordinary. Indifferent. Alive. And yet, in the quiet, he felt the truth. The currents never stop. The patterns never end. And perhaps, this is where everything begins again. A final exhale. A pause. A breath. And the echo remained. The city exhaled under the early morning sun. Sidewalks filled. Cars moved in ordered chaos. Ordinary life returned its rhythm, yet beneath it, nothing was the same. He stood at the window, the ledger now closed, its secrets revealed, its lessons absorbed. The confrontation, the spiral, the reckoning, all behind him, yet echoing in memory. The system had spoken, patiently, unrelentingly. And he had listened. You know this feeling. The calm after the storm. The awareness that even when events settle, their echoes persist. Moments of clarity linger in the quiet spaces. Many twists surfaced as reflection. Allies revealed their true intentions. Mistakes became insights. Paths that once seemed broken now illuminated new opportunities. You've asked this question too. What remains when the pressure fades? What endures in silence? And how do you carry forward, shaped by what was revealed, without being trapped by it? The ledger's glow was gone, but the truth remained. Freedom is not granted. Insight is earned. Courage is practiced. He exhaled, slowly, letting the lessons settle. The currents beneath the city remained, invisible, persistent, inevitable. But now he moved among them with awareness, deliberate, prepared, human. And perhaps, the quiet after the storm is where transformation truly begins. Where insight, clarity, and vigilance converge. Where every echo becomes a guide for the next step. He turned away from the window. The city moved on. He moved forward. And the story, his story, continued. The city slept under a blanket of quiet. Streetlights hummed faintly. Neon signs flickered like distant stars. Ordinary life persisted. Yet in the shadows, truths lingered. He returned to the ledger one last time. Closed, dormant, yet alive in memory. Every revelation, every consequence, every ripple of the storm pressed against him. Not as threat, but as shadow, a quiet reminder that insight carries responsibility. You know this feeling. The weight of knowing what others cannot. The understanding that clarity is both gift and burden. And that some truths, once seen, cannot be unseen. Many twists now existed as subtle reflections. Allies' motives revealed themselves slowly. Actions once dismissed now held meaning. And the currents, though quiet, continued to move, deliberate, unyielding. You've asked this question too. How do you live after revelation? How do you move forward knowing the system never sleeps? And how do you act when the echoes of truth persist? Outside, the city thrummed with ordinary life. Buses rumbled. Coffee machines hissed. Voices carried. Ordinary, familiar, safe. Yet beneath it, invisible currents shifted, patterns evolving, histories repeating. He exhaled. The ledger had taught him. Awareness is survival. Observation is power. Action is meaning. The shadow of truth lingered. Not as threat. Not as fear. But as guide. And in that shadow, he recognized his own reflection, human, vigilant, alive. The city moved on. Ordinary. Indifferent. Alive. And he understood, the story never ends. It only echoes. And the shadow, always waits. The dawn broke slowly over the city. Shadows retreated. Neon signs dimmed. Ordinary life resumed, coffee cups clinked, engines purred, footsteps echoed. Yet beneath this normalcy, patterns persisted, invisible but undeniable. He observed from the penthouse, the ledger long closed. Its lessons etched into memory, its insights alive in his mind. Every connection, every ripple, every twist he had seen now revealed a larger design, a system quietly in motion, endlessly adaptive. You know this feeling. The awareness that life flows along invisible currents. That every choice intersects with unseen consequences. That understanding these patterns is both a gift and a responsibility. Many twists lingered as subtle reminders. Allies behaved differently, influenced by forces unseen. Old mistakes now informed new strategies. And the city, unaware, moved along its paths, intersecting with the currents he had learned to read. You've asked this question too. Who notices the patterns? Who understands them? And who can navigate them without being consumed? He traced the invisible threads in his mind. Events, decisions, consequences, all converging into a lattice of insight. The ledger had taught him not just about control, but about anticipation. Not just about outcomes, but about perception. The city hummed below. Ordinary, indifferent, alive. And yet, he saw the motion beneath. Every ripple, every intersection, every hidden current. And he knew, awareness transforms ordinary life into a landscape of understanding. He exhaled slowly, letting the lessons settle. Patterns moved, life moved, time moved, and he moved with them, deliberate, vigilant, human. Because insight, once earned, cannot be taken away. And perhaps, in understanding the patterns, he had found freedom. The sun dipped toward the horizon. Golden light spilled across the city, painting streets and windows in fleeting brilliance. Ordinary life continued, cars hummed, footsteps echoed, conversations carried. And yet, the day felt heavier, imbued with unseen currents. He stood at the window, the ledger now silent, its lessons internalized. Every revelation, every consequence, every spiral of events pressed against him. Not as a burden, but as a quiet companion. The confrontation, the aftermath, the expanded reckoning, all had left their marks, indelible and precise. You know this feeling. The understanding that time moves forward, even when clarity has arrived. That awareness shapes choice. And that the echoes of action persist far longer than the moments themselves. Many twists lingered in memory. Allies' intentions, once unclear, now understood. Hidden currents, once invisible, now perceptible. And the city, unaware, continued its rhythm, ordinary yet subtly transformed. You've asked this question too. What is left after consequence? What endures beyond chaos? And who carries the lessons forward into the quiet that follows? He exhaled, slowly. Insight had become instinct. Clarity had become vigilance. And courage, once tested, had become resolve. The ledger pulsed no more, yet its presence remained. A reminder that systems move whether we see them or not. That choices ripple far beyond intention. That understanding, patience, and decisiveness are the truest forms of power. The city's lights began to twinkle against the darkening sky. Ordinary. Indifferent. Alive. Yet in the quiet of observation, he recognized the human truth. Every storm leaves lessons. Every challenge leaves insight. And every life, however ordinary it seems, moves in currents unseen. He turned from the window. The city moved on. He moved forward. And perhaps, in that motion, everything begins anew. A final breath. A pause. And the last reflection echoed, subtle, enduring, human. Night settled over the city. Streetlights shimmered. Neon signs pulsed faintly. Engines hummed, footsteps echoed, ordinary life continued. And yet, beneath it all, currents moved quietly, deliberately, endlessly. He stood once more at the penthouse window. The ledger lay closed on the desk, its lessons absorbed, its truth understood. Every ripple, every fracture, every revelation had guided him here. To the edge of comprehension, to awareness, to clarity. You know this feeling. The hush after the storm. The awareness that every choice carries weight. That every action ripples far beyond intention. And that survival is inseparable from insight. Many twists now existed only as quiet reflections. Allies, once uncertain, had revealed their true colors. Secrets, once buried, had spoken. And the unseen currents, once chaotic, now moved in patterns he had learned to read. You've asked this question too. Who carries forward the lessons of consequence? Who moves with clarity when the system never sleeps? And who understands that life, in all its ordinary rhythms, is a landscape of hidden currents? He exhaled slowly. The storm had ended. The confrontation was behind him. The spiral had resolved. And yet, the lessons persisted. Awareness remained. Courage endured. Clarity guided him forward. The city beneath him moved on. Ordinary. Indifferent. Alive. Yet in the quiet, he understood the ultimate truth. Every storm leaves echoes. Every choice leaves a trace. Every life, fully observed and fully lived, participates in currents unseen. He turned from the window. The ledger rested, silent but alive in memory. The currents continued, but he moved with them, deliberate, awake, human. And in that quiet, reflective moment, he realized. The story never truly ends. It only echoes. And perhaps, every ending is also a beginning. A final exhale. A pause. The city breathed. And the echo remained, subtle, enduring, profound.